The difference between you and a millionaire isn't in the bank account. It's happening right now, inside your head, in this very moment. As you're reading this, your brain is operating on a completely different frequency from that of someone who's already reached the top. And this difference isn't genetic, it isn't luck, it isn't privilege. It's simply a different way of processing reality. You probably believe that you need to have money first in order to think like a rich person. But the truth is the exact opposite. You need to think like a rich person first in order to have money. And this reversal, this shift in perspective, is what's going to change everything in the next few minutes. Because what I'm about to show you isn't magic formulas or empty promises. These are the exact mental patterns that separate the top 1% from the other 99%. These are the ways of thinking that millionaires use every single day, but that no one ever taught you. If you keep thinking the way you've always thought, you'll keep getting what you've always gotten. But if you're willing to question every belief that's brought you to this point, every automatic pattern running in your mind without permission, then get ready. Because what comes next isn't comfortable. It's transformative. The difference between those who build empires and those who spend their entire lives chasing their own tails isn't in the number of hours worked. It's in something much more subtle, something that happens inside their heads before any action is even taken. While most people live enslaved to what's happening right now, in this exact moment, this week, this month, the top 1% are already living 5 years from now. They can already see the end result while you're still fighting today's problem. This ability to think long-term isn't some mystical or genetic gift. It's a conscious choice about where to direct your attention. Think about how the human mind works. It was programmed to survive, not to thrive. Our ancestral brain is always in alert mode, scanning for immediate threats, worried about what could go wrong today. This mechanism was useful for escaping predators on the savannah, but it's absolutely destructive for anyone trying to build wealth and freedom in the 21st century. Short-term stress hijacks your mental energy and traps you in a vicious cycle of reaction where you're never truly creating anything, you're just putting out fires. People who've reached the top have learned to ask one simple question before spending energy on anything. Will this matter 5 years from now? If the answer is no, they simply don't engage in that battle. They don't ignore real problems, but they know how to distinguish between what's urgent and what's important. Urgency screams, bangs on the door, demands immediate attention. Importance whispers, waits patiently, but it's what builds the future. Most people choose what screams because it's easier, more tangible, more comfortable. After all, solving something today brings an immediate sense of relief. But that feeling is a dangerous illusion. The problem with short-term thinking is that it creates an invisible trap. You wake up every day and pour your energy into solving the same types of problems over and over. You feel productive because you're busy, but being busy doesn't mean being effective. It's like running on a treadmill. You sweat, you get tired, you feel like you're doing something, but you don't go anywhere. Meanwhile, those who think long-term are building systems, creating leverage, planting seeds that will bear fruit for years. They understand that true wealth doesn't come from working harder, but from working on things that multiply over time. How you handle stressful situations reveals exactly where you stand on this scale. Someone criticizes you at work, and you spend 3 days ruminating on it, losing sleep, imagining scenarios in your head, coming up with sharp comebacks. Will this matter 5 years from now? Probably not. But in those same 3 days, you could have channeled your mental energy into learning a new skill, building a valuable relationship, or taking the next step toward what you really want. Instead, you chose the stress. Not consciously, of course, but you chose it. So, what sets the top 1% apart isn't the absence of problems. It's how they filter what deserves attention. They've developed an internal radar that separates noise from signal. And that radar was trained through one simple practice, observing their own reactions. Every time something bothers you, pause and ask, will this be relevant to my journey a year from now? If not, take a deep breath and redirect your energy. It sounds too simple to be true, but most people never do this even once in their lives. They live on autopilot, reacting to everything in front of them as if it were all equally important. And maybe that's why so few people reach the top. Because getting to the top isn't about doing more things. It's about doing the right things and letting go of the rest. The long-term mind isn't trying to win every battle. It's choosing which war is worth fighting. And while you're distracted by minor skirmishes that'll be forgotten in weeks, that person is building an empire that will last decades. This long-term mindset creates space for a second, even deeper transformation, the ability to see patterns where most people see only chaos. Think about how ordinary people handle day-to-day problems. Something goes wrong, they rush to fix it. The next day, another problem pops up, and off they go again. At the end of the month, they look back and realize they've solved 50 different problems, but somehow they're still in the same place. It's frustrating, exhausting, and above all, completely unnecessary. What the top 1% have discovered is that most of the problems we face aren't truly isolated issues. They're symptoms of something bigger, manifestations of patterns that repeat relentlessly. While you're running around plugging hole after hole, they take a step back and ask, why do these holes keep appearing in the same spot? And that's where the real difference lies. Because once you identify the pattern, you can create a system that eliminates the problem at its root, instead of endlessly fighting the same symptoms. Let's make this more concrete. Say you're managing a team, and every week someone comes to you with the same question about how to process a certain task. You explain it, solve it, the person thanks you and leaves. The next week, someone else shows up with the same question. You explain it again, and again, and again. Most managers do this for years, complaining that the team doesn't learn, that they have to repeat everything 1,000 times. But the problem isn't the team. The problem is that you're treating the symptom, not the pattern. Someone who thinks in patterns looks at this situation and sees an opportunity to create a system. Maybe it's a clear document, a tutorial video, an automated process, or just a visual checklist. It takes an hour to create, but it saves hundreds of hours of future interruptions. It seems obvious when written out like this, but look at your own day and count how many times you're solving the same type of problem for the 10th, 20th, 50th time. If you're honest with yourself, you'll be shocked at how much energy is wasted. This blindness to patterns happens because our brains love feeling useful by solving things. Every time you fix a problem, you get a little hit of dopamine, a sense of accomplishment. It's addictive. You start identifying as the problem solver, as someone indispensable because you're always putting out fires. But that identity is a trap. You don't realize you're becoming a slave to the very problems you should have eliminated long ago. The top 1% understand that hard work without strategic intelligence is just wasted effort. They have nothing against hard work, but they refuse to work stupidly. And working stupidly means repeating efforts that could be systematized. It means not learning from mistakes, not documenting processes, not creating structures that work without your constant presence. That's why these people can scale. It's not because they work more hours. It's because every hour they work multiplies results through systems. This way of thinking completely changes how you approach any challenge. Instead of asking, how do I solve this? You start asking, how do I make sure I never have to solve this again? And that second question is infinitely more powerful because it forces you to think structurally, not just operationally. It forces you to build, not just fix. And the difference between building and fixing is the difference between freedom and slavery. Pattern recognition also applies to your own behaviors. Maybe you notice that every time you're anxious, you make bad decisions, or that whenever you skip breakfast, you have an unproductive day, or that every project you accept without proper analysis turns into a nightmare later. These aren't coincidences, they're patterns. And if you see them, you can start creating personal rules that protect you from yourself. Important decisions are only made in a calm state. Breakfast is non-negotiable. Every project goes through a 20-minute analysis before any commitment. Simple, but transformative. So, hard work is still necessary, but it needs to be in service of building systems, not endlessly repeating tasks. And those systems, once created, give you something no amount of money can buy: time. Time to think. Time for strategy. Time to climb another rung on the ladder of awareness and see reality from an even higher perspective. This time won through systems allows you to do something most people never experience: think from an elevated position. And here's one of the most powerful skills that separates those stuck in operations from those who build legacies. It's the ability to mentally shift to a level above the problem and view it through the eyes of someone already on a higher tier. This isn't about arrogance or pretending to be someone you're not. It's about training your mind to access perspectives that dramatically expand your options. Think about how a company works. On the factory floor, the worker is focused on executing their specific task. One level up, the supervisor is thinking about optimizing the workflow for the entire team. Another level up, the manager is thinking about how that department fits into the organization's bigger strategy. And at the top, the CEO is thinking about positioning the whole company in the market, where to invest, which trends to capitalize on. Each level sees a completely different reality of the same problem. And how you solve something depends directly on the level from which you're observing it. Most people spend their entire lives thinking only from the level they're at. If you're an employee, you think like an employee. If you're a manager, you think like a manager. There's nothing wrong with that, except for one thing: you're limited by the constraints of that level. But the top 1% have learned a powerful mental trick. They ask, if I were the director of this area, how would I solve this? If I were the owner of the company, what decision would I make? If I were an outside investor looking in, what would I see that's being overlooked? And these questions activate a different part of the brain, one that sees bigger contexts, long-term consequences, hidden opportunities. It works because it completely changes the types of solutions you consider. From the operational level, the fix for low sales might be working more hours calling clients. From the strategic level, it might be rethinking the entire product positioning or automating outreach so you reach 10 times more people with the same effort. These are entirely different solutions to the same problem, and the second one only emerges if you mentally level up. But there's internal resistance that comes up in this process. Part of you whispers, "Who am I to think like a CEO? I haven't even gotten there yet." And that's the devastating belief that keeps most people exactly where they are. You don't need the title to think like the person with the title. In fact, it's the opposite. People reach positions of power because they were already thinking that way long before they got the job. They were mentally operating at that level, and the title was just external recognition of an internal transformation that had already happened. This perspective shift also frees you from reactive thinking. People stuck in low-level thinking are always reacting to what happens to them. Something goes wrong and they panic, desperately searching for an immediate fix. Someone criticizes them and they defend themselves. An obstacle appears and they stop, frustrated. It's a way of living completely at the mercy of external circumstances, where you're just a leaf in the wind, blown wherever it goes. Those who think from a higher level see the same problem as part of a bigger game. They don't react, they respond. And the difference between reacting and responding is precisely the mental space created by the elevated perspective. They have enough distance to ask, does this really matter? What's the smartest move here? What would someone with more experience do? And these questions slow down the automatic impulse to just react, creating room for conscious, strategic choices aligned with bigger goals. So, start practicing this today. Every time you face a problem, pause for a few seconds and ask, how would someone 3 levels above me solve this? You'll notice that the answer that comes up is almost always better, more elegant, more efficient than your initial automatic reaction. And the more you do it, the more natural this way of thinking becomes. Your mind starts operating automatically from an elevated position, and you realize you're making decisions that 6 months ago you wouldn't even have considered possible. The interesting thing is that this elevation of perspective doesn't just happen at work or in business. It spreads to every area of life. Arguments that used to make you furious now seem trivial. Problems that seemed enormous now reveal themselves as small details in a much larger journey. And you start moving through the world with a different lightness, because you're no longer carrying the weight of every minor obstacle like it's a tragedy. You're seeing everything from above, navigating with clarity, choosing your battles wisely. This navigational clarity that comes from thinking at higher levels depends on an even more fundamental ability, one that's perhaps the hardest to develop because it goes against everything our biology programmed us to do. It's the ability to make decisions based on objective evidence, not on the emotional storms that rage inside us all the time. And here's an uncomfortable fact. Most people think they're making rational decisions when, in reality, they're just rationally justifying decisions they've already made emotionally. The human brain is a narrative-creating machine. It hates uncertainty, hates emptiness, so it fills in all the gaps with stories that make sense to it. Someone doesn't reply to your email quickly, and your brain spins an entire story. This person is avoiding me, they're probably upset with me, I'm likely going to lose this client. None of it may be true, but the story feels so real that you start acting as if it is. Your next actions are based on fiction your mind created, not on the objective reality of the facts. The top 1% recognize this human tendency and develop constant vigilance against it. They treat their emotions as interesting data points, but not as orders to obey. Feeling fear? Noted. Feeling excitement? Interesting. Feeling anger? Good to know. But none of these feelings alone dictate the next action. What dictates the action is the numbers, the measurable results, the concrete evidence of what works and what doesn't. It's an almost scientific approach to life, where you're constantly testing hypotheses and adjusting course based on real results, not on your hopes or fears. This doesn't mean becoming cold or calculating. It simply means recognizing that emotions are terrible advisors for important decisions. They were designed to keep you safe in primitive environments, not to help you navigate the complexities of the modern world. Fear kept you alive by making you run from predators, but today it paralyzes you in front of valuable opportunities. Excitement motivated you to explore new territories, but today it leads you to invest in empty promises because someone pitched it well. Emotions didn't evolve to make you rich or successful, they evolved to keep you alive. So, high performers create what we can call decision systems. These are preset rules, clear metrics, checkpoints that must be met before any commitment is made. An investor doesn't put money into something because they got excited about the pitch. They have specific criteria. What's the historical return on this type of investment? What are the measurable risks? How does it fit into the overall portfolio? The answers have to pass the filters before the decision is made. This kind of mental discipline is especially crucial in moments of pressure. Think about a day when everything's going wrong. You get heavy criticism, lose a big deal, have a serious conflict. In that emotional state, your natural tendency is to make drastic decisions. Quit everything, change direction completely, send that message that'll destroy a relationship. But those decisions are almost always terrible because they're made at the peak of an emotional storm. The top 1% have learned a golden rule. Never make important decisions in extreme emotional states. If you're too euphoric or too depressed, too angry or intensely fearful, that's not the time to decide anything significant. The time is to acknowledge the emotional state, give it space to pass, and only then, with a clear mind, look at the data. The results always point in the same direction. Strategic patience beats emotional impulse every time. This strategic patience that overcomes emotional impulses opens the door for you to realize something most people take decades to discover, if they ever do. Time is the only truly non-renewable resource you have. Money can be earned again. Relationships can be rebuilt. Health can be recovered to a certain extent. But every second that passes is gone forever. And how you treat this resource says everything about where you'll end up in the coming years. The top 1% have a completely different relationship with time. They don't see the hours in a day as something that just happens and needs to be filled. They see it as capital to invest, exactly the way they'd invest money. And just as no one with financial intelligence throws money away on things with no return, these people refuse to waste time on activities that don't generate real value. Every hour is a conscious choice about where to allocate a precious asset. But most people treat time as if it's infinite. They accept meetings they shouldn't because they don't want to be rude. They spend hours scrolling social media feeds because they need to relax. They say yes to energy-draining commitments because they don't know how to say no without guilt. And at the end of each week, they look back and realize they worked a lot but didn't advance anything meaningful. Time slipped through their fingers like sand, and they have nothing concrete to show for it. The mental trick that changes everything is to start auditing your time the same way you'd audit your finances. Pick any week and honestly track where every hour went. Not what you think you did, but what really happened. How much time in productive meetings versus meetings that could have been an email? How much deep work versus fragmented distractions? How much invested in learning and growth versus passive entertainment consumption? The numbers will shock you. High performers do this audit regularly and make ruthless decisions based on the result. They identify low-value activities and eliminate them without mercy. Not gradually, not later, now. That weekly meeting that never leads anywhere? Cancelled. That side project you keep out of obligation but hate? Shut down. That social commitment that drains you but you keep out of habit? Declined. It sounds harsh, but it's liberating. Every no to something low value is an automatic yes to something high value. This kind of time protection requires something few people have: the courage to disappoint others. Because the moment you start saying no, someone will get upset. They'll call you selfish, arrogant, someone who's changed and isn't as accessible as before. And part of you will want to give in, to back down, to be the available person you've always been. But here's the inconvenient truth. You can't protect your time and please everyone at the same time. You have to choose. And the choice becomes clearer with one simple question. 5 years from now, would you rather have achieved your most important goals or kept everyone comfortable with your availability? Because those two things rarely coexist. People who go far learn that some relationships will dissolve in the process, some invitations will be turned down, some expectations will be disappointed. And that's okay, because on the other side of that boundary is the freedom to build something meaningful with the time they've fiercely protected. So, start today. Look at your calendar for next week and identify at least 3 things that shouldn't be there. 3 commitments you accepted on autopilot but that, if you're honest, add nothing to what really matters. And cancel them. It'll be uncomfortable, maybe even awkward. But every hour reclaimed is an hour that can be invested in something that truly multiplies your results over time. These reclaimed hours, this carefully protected time, can be completely wasted if you don't pay attention to something most people dramatically underestimate: the environment where you spend your days. And we're not just talking about physical space, but something much deeper and invisible. We're talking about the influences around you, the conversations you join, the people you spend time with, the ideas you consume. All of this forms a mental force field that shapes your thoughts without you even noticing. The top 1% understand that you are, to a large extent, the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Not because you consciously copy them, but because the human brain is a social adaptation machine. It observes what's normal around you and adjusts your expectations, ambitions, and behavior patterns to fit that normality. If everyone around you complains about work, talks about debt, and only dreams about the weekend, your brain will calibrate that as normal, and you'll start thinking the same way without even realizing it. Now flip that. Put yourself in an environment where people talk about projects they're building, books that shifted their perspective, challenges they're overcoming. Your brain will recalibrate what's possible, what's expected, what's normal. Suddenly, that goal that seemed impossible starts looking just difficult. That risk that seemed irresponsible starts looking necessary. Your internal references change because the environment changed. But changing your environment doesn't necessarily mean cutting off all friendships or moving cities. It means being extremely intentional about where you direct your attention. If you spend 3 hours a day consuming negative news and toxic online arguments, it doesn't matter how many self-development books you read. The mental environment you've created is a swamp, and you're trying to grow a tree in it. It doesn't work. The swamp always wins. High performers treat their mental environment like a garden that needs obsessive care. They choose what comes in, content that expands, conversations that challenge, people who elevate, and they ruthlessly remove what contaminates. Chronic complaining, gratuitous negativity, empty distractions. Not out of arrogance, but out of strategic necessity. They know they can't control the outside world, but they can control with surgical precision what they allow into their inner world. This curation of environment also includes surrounding yourself with people a few steps ahead of where you are now. Not so far that they seem unreachable, but far enough to pull you upward. These people act as a positive gravitational force. Just being around them, you absorb thought patterns, problem-solving approaches, standards of excellence that would take years to develop alone. It's learning by osmosis. And perhaps the most underestimated aspect of all this is the quality of questions circulating in your environment. Mediocre environments ask mediocre questions. How do I work less? How do I avoid responsibility? How do I blame someone else for this? Excellence environments ask powerful questions. How do I create more value? How do I solve this more elegantly? How do I turn this obstacle into an advantage? Questions shape thinking, and thinking shapes reality. So, look around right now. Be honest. Is the environment you've created pulling you toward where you want to go, or holding you where you already are? Because that's the final difference. You can have all the strategies, all the discipline, all the knowledge. But if the environment around you doesn't support the version of yourself you're trying to become, the battle will be 1,000 times harder than it needs to be. Now you know the 6 mental pillars that separate those who build wealth from those who only dream about it. But knowledge without action is just entertainment. So the real question is, what are you going to do with this? Are you going to go back to autopilot tomorrow morning, repeating the same patterns that got you here? Or are you going to have the courage to implement at least one of these principles today? Think long term. Identify a destructive pattern in your life. Level up mentally. Make a decision based on data, not fear. Protect 1 hour of your day. Change one influence in your environment. Pick one. Start now. And if you want to continue this journey of mental transformation, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the next video will dive even deeper into these life-changing concepts. Your mind is ready to evolve. The question is, are you?